Donald Trump is panicking as he has effectively surrendered at this point to Iran. Trump has tapped out in these negotiations with Iran, essentially preparing to give them everything they want. But Donald Trump thinks that the American people are too dumb to realize what is going on and that will buy into his propaganda campaign. So let's talk about the facts and let's call out Donald Trump's fiction and propaganda. So this is the facts. Strait of Hormuz traffic barely is affected on the first day of the U.S. blockade, data shows, and as the Iranian social media accounts are posting, I'm choosing peace today. Do not test the retired troll in me. In other words, they're getting ready to mock Donald Trump, but it's just so embarrassing and humiliating that even the Iranian social media accounts are like, we're not going to even troll you. This is so embarrassing, because what CENTCOM put out was the following message. And the fact that CENTCOM, the United States CENTCOM, Central Command, has been reduced to this is so Trumpian, which means it's so utterly humiliating. This is the statement that Admiral Brad Cooper, who was once like a normal, strong admiral, this is the statement that he put out. In a statement from Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of U.S. Central Command, he states that the blockade of Iranian ports, quote, has been fully implemented as U.S. forces maintain maritime superiority in the Middle East. Cooper adds that since the blockade began on Monday, roughly 36 hours ago, U.S. forces have completely halted economic trade going into and out of Iran by sea. Even if you accept that as true, you're bragging about further shutting down commerce when the whole point that you were trying to do was open the Strait of Hormuz. We've double blocked it, everybody. Mission accomplished. Okay, so even if you accept what they're saying as true, it's ridiculous, but it's entirely false. Commercially available maritime data indicates that at least 8 vessels departed the Strait of Hormuz, including 6 Iranian or Iranian-linked vessels on April 14th. We talked about that U.S.-sanctioned tanker, the Rich Starry, heading to China, just going right past the blockade. But what about ships going into the Strait of Hormuz? Well, glad you asked that. Commercially available maritime data also indicates that at least 9 vessels entered the Strait of Hormuz, including 3 Iranian or Iranian-linked ships. So, Institute for the Study of War posits, is this part of the exemptions that the Trump regime is giving to these ships, or how come ships are going out past the blockade and in through the blockade while CENTCOM is saying we have maritime superiority? If you have maritime superiority, then why don't you control the Strait of Hormuz? Or is that just part of the master plan here that will be revealed in due time? Also, as tanker trackers, that does a great job, you guessed it, tracking tankers, explains, a non-Iranian supertanker capable of carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil, blacklisted by the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control for violating sanctions on Iran, just made her way into the country via the Strait of Hormuz, all while it had its signaling on so that anybody can see it. It didn't even try to hide where it is. It is mocking. They are mocking the United States right now. And one of the things that they're doing as well, and perhaps this is being done with the tacit agreement of the Trump regime, it's exactly what I said was going to happen. So you'll have a ship go to an Iranian port, one side of the Strait of Hormuz, right? Then it goes right in the other direction to Oman, another country, to the port of Oman on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz. And then they're like, look, Mom, we didn't leave from an Iranian port, so I guess we're not subject to the blockade. And the Trump regime is like, oops, I guess you're not subject to the blockade. It's just on the Iranian ports. Like, do y'all see what's going on and how weak and pathetic it is? But speaking about weak and pathetic, let's take a look at what Donald Trump has been saying since February 6th. Our editor-in-chief, Ron Filipkowski, he has listed Donald Trump continuing to say they want to make a deal badly. A direct quote from Donald Trump. February 6th, they want to make a deal badly. March 2nd, they want to make a deal badly. March 16th, they want to make a deal badly. March 24th, they want to make a deal badly. On the 25th, on April 1st, on April 13th, and then yesterday on April 14th, yes, they want to make a deal so badly. Donald Trump called up one of his favorite reporters, Jonathan Karl of ABC, and here's what Donald Trump told him yesterday. He goes, "I'm thinking about extending the ceasefire, but I don't think it's going to be necessary. Hey, Jonathan, I think you're going to be watching an amazing 2 days ahead. I really do." I asked if the war ends with a deal, or do you just say, look, we knocked out their capability and that's it. Donald Trump goes, it can end either way, but I think a deal is preferable because then they can rebuild. They really do have a different regime now. No matter what, we took out the radicals. They're gone, no longer with us. And then Donald Trump said to Jonathan Karl, "If I weren't president, the world would be torn to pieces." If I weren't president, the world would be torn to pieces. That's called malignant narcissism right there, of the most extreme kind. And Donald Trump exhibits that every single moment of every single day. Now, Donald Trump says, though, he's holding out for a grand bargain. That's what J.D. Vance was saying yesterday when he spoke at a Turning Point USA event where very few people showed up. It was like hundreds of people in a massive stadium. It was so humiliating for J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance is like, the thing about Donald Trump that we all need to think about when it comes to Iran, he's just holding out for the perfect deal, the grand bargain. We don't want to make small deals. Here's what J.D. Vance had to say about that. Let's play this clip.
He said, if you guys commit to not having a nuclear weapon, we are going to make Iran thrive. We're going to make it economically prosperous, and we're going to invite the Iranian people into the world economy in a way they haven't been in my entire life. And that's the kind of Trumpian grand bargain that the president has put on the table.
And while J.D. Vance is saying that, Maria Bartiromo of State Regime Media, which calls itself Vox, she interviewed Donald Trump yesterday, and she said that Donald Trump was running around the White House saying, the war is over. We've won. It's completely done. It's over. Here's what Maria Bartiromo says. Let's play this clip.
I just left the president. It was a great interview. He said a lot about the economy, about the Iran war, about NATO. One thing that I'll leave you with, I said to him, Mr. President, you keep talking about the war like was. I said, is it over? He said, it's over. Join the whole interview tomorrow, Mornings with Maria, Fox Business, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. I'll see you then.
Now, what are they saying about that in Iran? Social media accounts like the Iran embassy in the UK posting this image of Donald Trump, calling him Don Tzu, like Sun Tzu, with the art of war, but they have their own expressions. Don Tzu. If you can't open it, close it tightly, regarding the Strait of Hormuz. Or you have these cartoons that they're putting out of Iran, of the Houthis in Yemen chasing off aircraft carriers of the United States. One thing that we should be aware of, and it's obvious that the Iranians are aware of as well, as Donald Trump's we don't want a small deal. We want a grand bargain. So the Trump regime right now is sending its big aircraft carrier and its aircraft carrier group, the George H.W. Bush aircraft carrier. And because they are so afraid of going through the Red Sea, they're sending it all the way around Africa, because even the United States aircraft carriers are afraid of Iran's proxies in the Red Sea. So while our CENTCOM, just think about the logic. CENTCOM says we have maritime superiority. Okay, but you're afraid to send a United States aircraft carrier group, the pride and joy of the United States military. You're too scared to send that through the Red Sea because of the Houthis, so you're sending it all the way around Africa. That doesn't exactly instill a lot of confidence in ships in the Strait of Hormuz. You realize that, right? Do you think that the shipping industry is too dumb to realize that if a United States aircraft carrier group is too afraid to go into the Red Sea, where the capabilities of the Iranian proxy group, the Houthis, is less significant than the Iranian capabilities in the Persian Gulf, that you're sending a message that you're scared? Or are we supposed to just buy into all of this propaganda that you spew? The Iranians aren't. They're posting images like this, They're showing photos of Donald Trump's mom. And Donald Trump's mom, they have her saying, yes, my son Donald is an idiot with zero common sense and no social skills. He is an egomaniac sociopath beyond belief, but he is my son. I sincerely just hope he never gets into. He would be a disaster if he were to ever become the president. He's a catastrophe for humanity. Then Iran's social media account says, do you remember this? Rest in peace, Mary Ann Trump. Second version. Then they talk about invoking the 25th Amendment. Then they did a new Lego video where they call Melania Trump Epstein Queen in Iran right now. And they're just mocking Melania, saying Epstein Queen, Epstein Queen, Epstein Queen. And again, if you want to know you have to study what's going on in Iran. Like, we have to develop an understanding of the true dynamics here, right? And how they also view in Iran that they won the war. And they're right. They won the war against the United States. What did the United States get? The U.S. claims it wanted regime change. It claims it wanted to destroy Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, and they didn't get that. I mean, Donald Trump can lie about it, but it's a massive lie. It's war crimes compounded by the fact that America has never been weaker. So let me share with you this interview, what a well-known professor, Professor Morandi, who was part of the Iranian delegation in Pakistan, what he is saying about those negotiations, why they failed. And just to be clear, this professor was with the Iranian delegation. He traveled with them when they were worried about security issues, about how they would get back from Pakistan and how they flew to Russia. And they took a train to get back to Iran. And because of when they had to take vehicles rather to get to Iran, he was with them. He traveled with all the negotiating from Iran so he knows what their perspective is. Don't you think that we should listen to understand, especially if we're going to be engaging in more negotiations, what they're thinking? So here's what Professor Morandi from Iran had to say about Iran's sovereignty and how Iran will not give up its sovereignty in negotiations to civilian uranium enrichment. Here's what he says. Play this clip.
Iran is not going to give up its sovereignty. It's not going to give up its rights as a sovereign and independent country. And what Vance was demanding on behalf of the Israeli regime, because let's be very clear, the United States was not negotiating, the U.S. delegation was not negotiating on behalf of the United States. It was negotiating on behalf of the Israeli regime. And I think that these negotiations really showed that the U.S. government its priority is not the United States. The priority is Netanyahu and the Zionist lobby. It was clear from their demands. It was clear from their behavior. And it was clear that when progress was made at the negotiating table, that subsequent to phone calls and discussions that Vance would have with others in the United States, that the negotiations would change route. So unlike the Iranian negotiators, who had the full authority to negotiate and to make decisions, it was clear that for the Iranians that Vance did not have that authority.
Here's the Iranian perspective that the U.S. lost the war, as he reflects. And again, he's with the Iranian negotiating team. So what he's saying is reflective of the collective voices in the room from Iran negotiators. Play this clip.
What they were demanding is that Iran give up its peaceful nuclear program. And that's just not possible, because that's a sovereign right of the Iranian nation. And the revolution in Iran 47 years ago was about regaining sovereignty and independence. It was about dignity. It was about honor. And so there's no chance in the world that Iran is going to capitulate to demands by the United States, especially since the United States launched and the Zionist regime launched an evil war, and they lost. They were defeated. They gained nothing. And instead of growing stronger, they weakened their own position. And also at the negotiating table, Vance was demanding, and the United States demanding, that Iran share the Strait of Hormuz with the United States, which is quite interesting. That the United States doesn't care about Kuwait or Bahrain or the Emirates or Qatar or Saudi Arabia of the Strait of Hormuz with Iran, without even mentioning the names of these countries, or even Oman, which shares the Strait of Hormuz with Iran. But Iran said no. This is not the Gulf of Mexico. So why should we share anything with you? Who are you to demand authority over the Strait of Hormuz? So everything that Vance was demanding was illogical, illegal, and they did not have the decency to even mention this in public. But of course, the very fact that he says Iran did not, what was it that you said, that they did not meet our demands? The United States is in, no two negotiating countries. When they're negotiating, the issue is not of one side making the demands and the other side adhering to them or obeying them. At negotiations, you're supposed to find solutions. But when the war started a month and a half ago, the United States said that Iran has to capitulate. It has to accept unconditional surrender. Well, that didn't work well. That didn't work out well. And after a few weeks, they had to constantly revise their position. And ultimately, they gave a 15-point peace plan, which was, again, unacceptable. And Iran rejected it. And then ultimately, when they accepted to discuss talks, they wanted the ceasefire. And when they accepted the Iranian 10-point plan as a framework for negotiations, then Iran accepted the peace plan. So the United States is, during war, they were unable to get any sort of unconditional surrender. How do they expect that after they've lost the war, that Iran is going to surrender to them at the negotiating table?
And here's what he says, that there is zero trust between the Iranians and in general, and that negotiating team and their leadership and the United States. Here's what he says.
The Iranians do not trust the United States, and they never did trust the United States. Even before the 12-day war we had last year, and we were negotiating with the Americans, and they kept moving the goalposts during the negotiations. The Iranians didn't trust them. Some people thought that the United States was able to fool Iran through those negotiations because it was clear that they were conspiring. It was admitted afterwards that during the negotiations they were actually conspiring to attack Iran, and they wanted to catch Iran off guard. And that just shows how sinister Trump and his regime are. But Iran knew that an attack was coming. But the reason why it negotiated was so that the international community and Iranians would see that the problem is not Iran. And that had a very huge effect. I think the damage done to the United States by being so deceitful and murderous at the same time is enormous. And then, of course, as you rightly pointed out, before this war, the United States did the same thing. They negotiated with Iran. The Omani foreign minister said that significant progress was made, yet the United States attacked. And that again shows that there's no reason why anyone, the Iranians aside, no one else should trust the United States at anything, because they're deceitful and they're sinister.
And so one other development happened yesterday also that I think is worth pointing out so that we can all be on the same page here about, just as I mentioned at the outset, fact versus fiction. So one of the things that Iran said was a precondition to reaching a resolution was a complete, not just ceasefire, but security guarantees in Lebanon for the Iranian proxy group Hezbollah in Lebanon. Not the Lebanon government, Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's what Iran is looking for. I'm just letting you know what their position is, okay? That's what the Iranian position is. So what Donald Trump Netanyahu did is they invited the Lebanon government over to the White House, not Hezbollah, obviously, the Lebanon government, to discuss potential ceasefire with Israel, the United States, and Lebanon. A trilateral negotiation took place in the White House. But Iran is looking at that, and people who understand the dynamic is looking at that and be like, what's Lebanon going to be doing here? That's not the core issue. The core issue is Hezbollah. And that's what Iran has been communicating. So again, this is like theater, I guess, to say what? We met with Lebanon, everybody, and Lebanon's agreeing to this, that, and the other. I mean, the State Department issued a readout after a trilateral meeting with Israel and Lebanon on April 14th. And they said this was a historic milestone. It says that Washington reiterated support for Israel's right to defend itself. It said negotiations could unlock reconstruction aid and economic recovery for Lebanon. Israel pushed for disarming all non-state groups and dismantling their infrastructure. All sides agreed to launch direct negotiations at a later date. So even with the Lebanon government not Hezbollah, the Lebanon government in DC. There was no deal. They agreed to negotiate at a later date, whatever that means. And then Israel talked about continuing to bomb Lebanon where there's Hezbollah. But as we know, Israel and Netanyahu have been hitting suburban areas in Beirut and other areas, killing lots of civilians. And a Lebanese government official was telling the Washington Post and other media outlets that they don't believe that Israel-Lebanon talks will lead to a ceasefire. Quote, what does Lebanon have to offer on a negotiating table? Nothing. It's not the core issue. So that's where we're at right now. We'll keep you posted every step of the way, but you have Donald Trump creating this facade, this idea that, look at our maritime. We have maritime superiority, air superiority. We've destroyed them. We've blown them up to the Stone Age. And meanwhile, Donald Trump's like, okay, could we just give you what you want? As I said in the video I did yesterday, where we're at right now, Iran basically said, look, in terms of nuclear uranium enrichment for non-civilian use, we want to hold off for 5 years. Trump's like, can you do 20? Can you give me 20? Obama's deal, Iran was not able to enrich at all. So Donald Trump, it's just a weaker deal. It's so obviously pathetic. And you heard from the professor that basically Donald Trump wanted to just share the Strait of Hormuz. That's what he wants to do, share it to a JV. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million. Thanks for watching, y'all.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.